And then everybody else found out how fast he was. So what the hell else you want to know? You Pine Bluff suckers, stop trying to steal my thunder. I'm not from no city, I'm from Compton, fool.
What's up, Smoke?
Nah.
Feared me in Hollywood. They don't like me in Hollywood.
Why do they not like you?
I don't wear dresses. I don't do that gay stuff on TV. They had to get some other black person to do that stuff. I'm talking, that's gunning. But they all confess they love the Lord. But you cannot compromise yourself if you love the Lord.
They say even gangsters feared him not because he pulled triggers, but because he reminded them of someone who actually could.
Come on, Smoke, let's go in.
Man, I'm on probation. I can't be in it.
Stop being come on.
One stare from Tommy Tiny Lister could make your knees buckle. In the 90s, his name echoed through every hood, not for any set he claimed, but for the role he played on screen. Debo, the ultimate street bully. But Tommy wasn't about that life. Growing up in Compton, he stayed clean and focused.
He's, I told you, I pulled that from Big U. I used him as my background of how I wanted this character to be perceived, how bad this guy was. It's when Ice Cube pulled the gun on him. He said, "What you gonna do with that?" Besides make me mad. That was cold-blooded.
He wasn't a gangster. He was a performer who studied real fear. This is the story of Tommy Tiny Lister, the man who never joined a gang, but became Hollywood's scariest gangster. Tommy Lister was born on June 24, 1958, in Compton, California, a city that needs no introduction. Compton has produced rap legends, athletic icons, and unfortunately, headlines drenched in gang violence. The streets were tough, and growing up black in Compton during the 60s and 70s wasn't a movie, it was survival. But Tommy was different. From a young age, he suffered from a detached and deformed retina, which left him blind in his right eye. It gave him a signature squint, the same squint that would one day terrify moviegoers. Instead of letting this make him a target, he turned it into a strength. He didn't walk the streets looking for trouble. He walked them looking for ways out.
Everybody love Jesus? I grew up in a city called Compton.
Tommy was deeply religious, and not in the performative sense either. This wasn't just "I believe in God" for the cameras. This man lived it.
They all confess they love the Lord. But you cannot compromise yourself if you love the Lord.
He was raised in a devout Christian household where church wasn't just a Sunday routine, it was life. His mother made sure of that. Choir, prayer meetings, Bible study, the whole thing. And while the streets of Compton were raising many of his peers on survival instincts and gang loyalty, Tommy was getting raised on scripture and soul music. But don't get it twisted, that church boy could break you in half if he wanted to. Tommy's physique was a force of nature, 6'5", muscles stacked like cinder blocks, a jawline carved out of granite. He looked like he could bench press a Buick, and maybe even throw it across the street. His body was built for dominance, and he didn't waste it. He channeled that raw power into sports. Track and field was his first love, and he excelled. Shot put became his domain, and he threw like he was launching missiles. Later, football came into the picture too. This wasn't just a hobby, this was a lifeline. Athletics was how Tommy escaped the gravitational pull of the streets. California State University, Los Angeles offered him a scholarship, and he took it and ran with it all the way to a national title in shot put. That scholarship saved him. It gave him a route most of the kids he grew up with would never get, because in that part of Compton, the options were limited. Join a gang, hustle, or get swallowed. Tommy didn't want any of those choices. He was determined to stay out of it.
That she was a little kid that, like, he was like helping, like he would just entertain the kids and everything. He was just like that, and he was like, "That was you? Oh man!" Just I don't know. He was so positive. Honestly, he's one of the most positive people I've ever met.
And according to those who knew him back then, he wasn't just a big guy with big dreams, and he had a big heart too. He was funny, warm, playful, a little goofy sometimes. But make no mistake, when he was serious, you felt it. He could have easily joined a set. He had the size, the intimidation factor, the street cred from just existing in Compton with that kind of presence. If he had decided to bang, there's no question, he would have risen fast. Some even say the gangs tried to recruit him, but he always said no. Why? Well, fans and old friends have different theories. Some say it was his sheer physical size. When you look like the Hulk, you don't need to roll with anyone. You are the protection. Others believe it was something deeper, fear, but not fear of men, not fear of what a gang might do. No, it was fear of God. Tommy was always prayed up, even in Hollywood later on, when the fame hit, when the roles got darker, when he started portraying killers and gangsters and crooked characters. He never lost his faith. That foundation from childhood never cracked, and in many ways, it saved him, not just from jail or the streets, but from losing himself. Because let's be honest, growing up where he did, in that era, not joining a set was rare. It wasn't just about choice. Sometimes it was about survival. But Tommy found another way. And that decision to walk the narrow path made all the difference. Tommy Lister never planned on becoming a movie star. In fact, he was perfectly content breaking records on the field and praising Jesus in the locker room. But after college, life had other plans. It wasn't film school or an acting class that opened the gates to Hollywood for Tommy. It was wrestling. Not the kind you see in Olympic stadiums either. We're talking full-on body-slammed through a table villain in tights kind of wrestling. In the late 1980s, the World Wrestling Federation was looking for something new, something fresh, something theatrical enough to sell tickets and big enough to scare Hulk Hogan on camera. He was cast as Zeus, the unhinged antagonist in No Holds Barred, a gloriously over-the-top wrestling film where Hogan played the all-American hero and Lister played, well, an unmovable nightmare. The movie itself? A cheesy, campy cult classic. But Tommy's performance? Undeniable. He didn't just act like a bad guy, he became one. When Zeus stormed onto the screen, growling and towering over everyone, kids ran out the room. Adults sat up straight. This wasn't acting. This felt real. And Vince McMahon, the master puppeteer of pro wrestling and marketing genius, saw the opportunity of a lifetime. He decided to blur the line between fiction and reality. He brought Zeus into the ring for real, billing Tommy as an actual WWF wrestler and sending him to feud with Hulk Hogan live on television. It was bizarre, it was theatrical, and it was brilliant. Fans hated Zeus. They booed him relentlessly. But that meant one thing. Tommy was doing his job flawlessly. He wasn't a trained wrestler, but that didn't matter. His presence alone told the story. But for Tommy, the squared circle was never the final destination. It was just the on-ramp. Hollywood had taken notice. Casting directors began circling. His look, unmistakable. His voice, thunderous. His glare, it could silence a room. Villain roles came flooding in. Bit parts, muscle for hire, henchman, bodyguard. He was Hollywood's go-to tough guy. Still, all those roles were just stepping stones, because in 1995, Tommy landed the one part that would define him forever. Here comes Debo. The film was low budget, shot in just 20 days. No massive studio backing, no A-list stars, just a tight script, a hungry cast, and a real story about life in the hood told by people who actually lived it. Friday wasn't supposed to be a blockbuster, but it became one. Written by Ice Cube and DJ Pooh, the film was a love letter to South Central LA, but one with an edge. It was funny, sure, but it was also honest. And right in the middle of it all was a character who stole every single scene without saying much at all.
What's up, Smoke?
Nah,
What you got on my drink?
nah.
Debo, a mountain of muscle who rode a tiny bike, jacked people for their stuff, knocked grown men out with one punch, and never ever asked permission. He didn't need to. When Debo showed up, people scattered. He was the hood's ultimate boogeyman. What you got on my 40, homie? That line alone cemented his legacy.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that was Big U for the whole
Big
60s.
But here's the thing. Debo wasn't just a random creation. He was based on a real person.
Yes, I did inspire the Deebo character. Yes.
Eugene Henley, better known as Big U, was a feared and respected figure in LA gang history. A leader within the Rollin' 60s Crips, Big U was known throughout Compton and South Central as someone you didn't cross. Ice Cube knew him. Tommy Lister knew him. Everyone did. And Tommy, with his deep roots in the neighborhood, studied Big U's mannerisms and brought them to life with chilling accuracy. The result, terrifying realism. Debo wasn't a caricature. He was a mirror reflecting every bully, every threat, every legend passed down in hushed tones on front porches and stoops across the city. He was everybody's worst memory from the block rolled into one unforgettable character. Tommy Lister became Debo, so much so that fans could no longer separate the two. People crossed the street when they saw him. He'd walk into restaurants and feel the energy shift. Some folks even refused to make eye contact. That's how convincing he was. That's how real he made it. But behind that menacing role, still the same church boy, the athlete, the guy who didn't bang. Tommy Lister was playing a nightmare, but he never stopped being a man of God. And yet, as his fame grew, so did the weight of the character he carried. Because when you play a legend that well, sometimes you don't get to put it down. By the late 90s, the myth of Debo had overtaken the man who played him. To millions, Tommy Lister was the muscle-bound menace who snatched chains and knocked out neighbors without blinking. But here's the real story, the one most people never saw. Tommy was nothing like Debo, not even close. Off-screen, he was shy, goofy, gentle, the kind of man who'd crack jokes between takes and ask if you'd eaten that day. He was known to bow his head in quiet prayer before scenes, sometimes even praying for the crew. And when the set went dark, he'd pull out his Bible and start reading verses like armor for the soul. He didn't just talk about faith, he lived it. Even in Compton, where reputations are forged in smoke and scars, people knew the truth. Tommy wasn't in a set. He wasn't catching fades or hustling on corners. He wasn't slinging, banging, or stacking bodies. He was the big dude who kept to himself, rolled solo, and walked with God. Not because he was soft, far from it. Tommy had the frame to flatten just about anyone, but he chose discipline over impulse, peace over chaos. While others chased clout in the streets, Tommy chased purpose. Still, Hollywood has a way of trapping people in their most iconic role, and for Tommy, that meant Debo never really left. Fans would spot him in public and tense up. Grown men crossed the street. Mothers pulled their kids in close. Children cried just seeing his face. And every now and then, a young hothead caught between fanboy and fantasy would try to test him, thinking Debo was real. Lots of fans think that Tiny Lister actually lived that gangsta life, one journalist once said, but nothing could be further from the truth. And yet, Tommy leaned into the myth. He understood the performance didn't end with the credits, so when people asked for Debo, he gave it to them. The scowl, the glare, the grunt. But once the pictures were taken, he'd go right back to hugging babies, giving out blessings, and cracking jokes about how tiny the bike was. The irony was never lost on him. The man who played a monster had the softest heart in the room. As time passed, Tommy Lister kept working. His resume was long and his presence never got old. He was unforgettable in The Fifth Element, that deep voice echoing across a sci-fi universe. And in The Dark Knight, he proved once again that sometimes the scariest-looking man in the room holds the deepest moral compass. Directors loved casting him, not just because of his size, but because of the gravity he brought to a role. Tommy didn't need pages of dialogue. His energy said it all. Still, no matter what role he played, fans kept coming back to one name: Debo. He became a meme before memes existed. His scenes were quoted in barbershops, battle raps, and backyards across the country. "What you got on my 40, homie?" That line lived forever. Rappers name-dropped him. Street legends imitated him. TikTokers reenacted him, riding imaginary bikes into viral fame. He became folklore, an urban legend with gold teeth and a 1,000-yard stare. But behind the fame, something in Tommy began to shift. He felt the call, a deeper one, and he answered it. He became a born-again Christian, not quietly either. He took that same booming voice and used it to reach people: churches, schools, juvenile halls, youth rallies. Wherever there was pain, confusion, or lost direction, Tommy showed up with truth. He spoke to young men who looked like him, sounded like him, grew up like him. He warned them about the traps of the hood, the illusion of fast money, the myth of toughness, the lie that violence makes you real. He told them what he knew to be true: that faith was strength, that purpose was freedom, that God could flip your script if you let him. Tommy Lister spent his Hollywood years being feared, but he spent his final years making sure he was understood. Because in the end, he wasn't just Debo, he was bigger than that.
Tommy "Tiny" Lister, the wrestler and actor best known as neighborhood bully Debo in the Friday movies, has died. Lister was found unresponsive at his California home yesterday.
In December 2020, the entertainment world was blindsided by tragic news. Tommy "Tiny" Lister had passed away at the age of 62. For many, it felt sudden, like a gut punch out of nowhere. One moment, he was on set, prepping for roles, engaging with fans, full of that same unmistakable presence he had brought to screens for decades. The next, he was gone.
He tested positive for COVID-19. His manager, who calls him a gentle giant, says 2 weeks ago he complained about breathing issues.
Initial reports indicated he had been experiencing symptoms consistent with COVID-19. He had trouble breathing, seemed visibly ill, and had abruptly canceled upcoming filming commitments just days before. Still, no one expected that to be the end. Fans across the world were devastated. Within hours, tributes flooded social media platforms. Actors, musicians, and longtime admirers posted their favorite clips and personal memories. Hashtags like #RippyDebo and #TinyLister began trending. But alongside the grief, something else began to stir suspicion. Online forums and comment sections lit up with theories. "Something's off," one commenter wrote. "This wasn't just COVID." The speculation wasn't entirely baseless either. Some posts claimed Tommy hadn't been well for months, pointing to recent interviews where he appeared fatigued or disoriented. Even though nothing is proven, all evidence suggests that Tommy's health had been deteriorating for a while, said one post that quickly went viral. Others raised eyebrows at the silence from close friends and colleagues. Why weren't more people speaking out? Why had there been no detailed explanation from his inner circle? The unanswered phone calls, the missed check-ins, they all added fuel to the growing whispers. There were quiet rumors, all unconfirmed, that Tommy had been facing more than just physical illness. Some speculated about lingering stress, untreated medical conditions, or even emotional battles he may have kept hidden from public view. The streets talked. The blogs talked louder. The internet went crazy saying something didn't add up, said another fan, and in truth, that confusion reflected something deeper, how difficult it was to accept that a giant like Tiny could simply fade out. But perhaps the explanation isn't as dark or mysterious as many want it to be. Maybe it's as painfully simple as a body, worn down after decades of punishing schedules, heavy lifting, and the physical weight of playing larger-than-life roles. A body that finally said, whether his passing came from illness, overexertion, or something more complicated, one thing remains undisputed. It left a void, a very big void. Tommy "Tiny" Lister left behind a legacy few could match. He wasn't the best actor, he wasn't the biggest star, but he was unforgettable. That's something even Oscar winners can't always say.
One of the few famous people I met at the time, and he was just so welcoming, and it was like we all hung out afterwards, and he just couldn't be a nicer guy.
He was a man who played monsters but lived like a monk. A guy who could have easily been swallowed by the streets of Compton but walked a different path. He showed the world that you don't have to be a product of your environment. You can survive it. You can transcend it.
The handful of roles that we saw him in, I think were so memorable that nobody really forgets, like Deebo from Friday, and I remember him from The Fifth Element as the president of the Federation.
Today you'll find murals of Deebo in LA. You'll hear rappers still dropping his name. You'll see old heads explaining Friday to their kids like it's sacred scripture. And somewhere up above you can bet Tiny's smiling, probably wearing that gold chain, probably squinting with that evil Deebo face, but definitely laughing with God. Because in the end, the most feared man in Hollywood was just a big scared guy with a big heart and a bigger mission. So next time you hear someone call Tiny Lister a gangster, correct them. He wasn't a gangster, he played one. He grew up around them. He avoided their path. And he used his God-given talents to become something greater. Tommy "Tiny" Lister was a legend, not just because he could scare you with one look, but because he proved that being feared on screen doesn't mean you can't be loved off it. R.I.P. to the real Debo, not just the character, but the man who brought him to life.